burnout and where do you, but that's what you guys get to, that's where
Yeah,
you
that's what we're going to
experts
talk
come
about.
in. That's so cool. So I
Yeah.
am thrilled for that. So with that, I want to, are we set to start now? We are. Are we already 2 minutes in? Shoot, I'm not managing my time well. I'm sorry about that. Just making sure like microphones and stuff work. So with that, I want to introduce and thank at the same time Dana Houston Jackson is the lead senior change management advisor at 1898, which is a part of Burns and McDonnell. And she has been a champion of this topic. We have just had the absolute joy of working with Dana as an attendee, as a speaker, to just share her knowledge and experience with this topic with everyone here. And it's such a two-way street, and it always has been. So thrilled that you're here to share your knowledge with us. And with that, I'll shut up. Take it away.
That's great. Thank you, Ashley, for that introduction. I've always enjoyed attending your conferences. I learn a lot back and forth. For those that aren't familiar with Burns & McDonnell, we're a 123-year-old company, international, 8,000 strong, scores of regional offices, but 100% employee owned, which is a distinction here. It has one full general practice just dedicated to utilities and another just to transmission and distribution, T&D, and 10 other industries that it also services. It mainly provides engineering, architecture, and construction services. So those are a lot of industries that we pull lessons from, which is why I think we can get real rich on these particular subjects. And like Beth, our previous speaker, I work with various clients and other consultants and change managers from all over. And I heard the same common theme at the end of 2020 and the first quarter of 2021. And that theme was weariness, being drained, and change saturation in people, meaning no room for any more changes, like a sponge that's full of water, right? Saturated. And both of these are manifestations that have been more pronounced than I've seen before in my career. And Beth showed some great graphics on this. So thank you, Beth, for sharing that. Now, granted, for all of us, not only was 2020 a lot, but it's a lot of everything seems to continue into 2021. And it certainly was a lot for me personally. And this can make it really hard to focus, much less focus other people and efforts that are going on around you. You're gifting me for 35 minutes of your time, so I want to gift you with something that you can value and truly use. There were two parts to this original presentation: change weariness and change saturation. They're not the same thing, but they do overlap. We only have time for one part in today's shortened conference. So I want you to use your text box and tell me which topic you most want to hear about. And we're going to concentrate on those messages. I'll focus on that. And then Ashley, in a minute, I'll ask you to call out the consensus. But my first few slides really and messages apply to both topics. So I'm going to keep going because we are going to run out of time, despite how fast I may talk. But you can also hit me up on LinkedIn if you would like to know more about these topics here. And I am controlling multiple screens, so if you see me look away, it's only to change a slide. So I am going to show you my last slide first, in case I bore you in this presentation and you want to leave. I get value when a trusted colleague really recommends a short, powerful, useful read. And this was one that was recommended to me, and I am paying it forward to be my recommendation to you. With this or any seemingly unsolvable problem, this may be your next read. Change saturation and change weariness can seem unsolvable, but work your way through this book in that context and your mindset may shift. This is a short tale. It even includes a memory palace, which is a system to assist your memory. It dates back to the ancient Greeks and Romans. And if you're a Sherlock Holmes fan, then you know that he used memory palaces really to solve cases. So I can say this is interesting. Ashley brought up this term, burnout. It is happening at a higher rate across the boards right now. I mean, all of our social media channels and articles are saturated with this. And this is industry agnostic, by the way, as it's an issue that is people-centric. but industry agnostic. So perhaps you've experienced this yourself, even temporarily. I know I had, so it is real. April is Stress Awareness Month. So I thought I'd give you some overly simplified but doable actions that can prevent or reverse this if this is happening to you. So consider this my mental safety moment as well. Now let me ask you this question. If you and your teammates or clients are feeling this way and are in this mental state, then how many new change initiatives and projects do you think that they're going to be able to or want to adopt and complete, no matter how positive the changes may be? Just pop that into the chat. So Ashley, what's our verdict? Are we talking saturation or weariness?
Looks like we're talking saturation.
All right, let's get into the next one. For some reason, I thought that may come up first. All right, so when it comes to helping our people make change, we've already lost the battle if they're not even in the right mindset to hear or have a willingness or ability to change anymore. Even slight changes that we offer can tip their scales that normally wouldn't do so. So we need companies to stick around, right? Because we all want to stay employed and we want our teams and our groups and efforts to be successful. So how do we help others understand and navigate through this? Change management is a unified practice that is built heuristically. That means it's based on workability and experimentation. It's kind of like the natural laws rather than the physical sciences. And change saturation is one of those principles in the field of change management. Change saturation, it typically occurs, and I know Beth gave you one definition. I'm going to give you a different slant on it. It typically occurs when there is so much change going on that it negatively impacts individuals in the organization. And change saturation can usually be broken down to two variables. And these variables are change capacity and change disruption. So if you understand this, then we can look at how do we increase capacity and reduce disruption in your specific teams and organizations. So change saturation, those again, it typically occurs because no one in the organization keeps or uses a complete portfolio view, right, of all the change efforts underway from an enterprise level down to the smallest teams that are being impacted. And they either have no portfolio at all, or only the big enterprise-wide changes are being tracked, right? But the number of small changes for people that comes into their own division and from their own division or department or team, those ones can be even more disruptive to individuals personally. So just as you saw with Alex Mate and 71 and Change demo, a very solution for this problem with their Change Analytics portfolio tool, if you don't have a change portfolio, that's where to start. And obviously we could start right there with 71 and Change with their particular tool that they have already created and kind of customized for Edison. So now I want to bring this to life for you. I want you to think of your own life as a portfolio of change for a minute, right? You've divided your life into many work streams. Yourself, your own care, your family, your work, the world, groups that you're a part of, right? Hobbies, spiritual outlets, etc. And right now, your bandwidth on these work streams or your capacity for change, it's much smaller because you've been hit and you continue to be hit with so much change disruption. And so is everyone else in your company from the top to the bottom. So I recently recommended to a client putting a halt to a few changes because of their saturation levels. I mean, it just wouldn't go well for anyone, and it would create more resistance to the change, trying to force it on teams that are drowning in change saturation. It was better to be timed later. We'd actually save time in the overall change implementation plan. So running away, like this graphic shows, as much as we all dream about it sometimes, right? And ignoring that missing or complete change portfolio view, that's never good for long-term growth and prosperity, which means it isn't really good for us personally either because, again, we need to stay employed. All right, so take a look at this. The necessity to change by an individual, that must be greater than their burnout if we want to get the change made. And there's a balance for any company between running the business and business as usual, right? And changing the business. And just like Patrick brought up, how to influence both sides to get some consensus, we got to understand their worlds, right? Alex gave an excellent example of how the change portfolio helped to influence the worlds and kind of bridge the gap, which is part of our job. Right? The leader's job is to always change the business, to grow and expand. You're not going to change that, right? That's what keeps them up at night. That's what most of their focus is on, and that's their world. Not just keeping the doors open today, but ensuring that they stay open tomorrow. So those on the front line, usually they have a different daily priorities and mindsets, and their thoughts mainly lead more towards getting the work done than running the business.
Dina,
So
I'm
we
going to just jump in. Quick question that came in on the chat. Did you have a formula for change saturation, or is it simply comprised of those two components, capacity and disruption?
Yeah, for this particular presentation, Ashley, we're only going to talk about capacity and change disruption. I know Beth showed you a formula for her
Okay.
algorithm and so forth in the last presentation on it. What I'm expanding on, because we're talking through saturation and weariness and some fundamentals, is capacity and capability, and that in itself, right? And
Got
that's
it.
part of our job in change management. It's to create capacity and capability at all levels and kind of bridge those gaps. So I want to kind of narrow the target down to that for the remaining time that we have on it.
Terrific.
Um,
Thank you, Manny, for the question.
yeah, you bet.
Okay.
So there's a question on the screen right now, and it's a valid question that a manager has to ask themselves before taking on a problem. Some of these problems have been around for a while, and they can keep being around, right, without too much debt. None of us have an unlimited time or energy. So what matters now really is how wisely we put to use the time and the energy that we do have. So prioritizing problems is as important to identifying them in the first place. And I'm going to show you a tool with that. And prioritizing takes a judgment call, of course, on what really needs doing. So I think how we is change management really as the discipline involves business acumen with psychology, emotional intelligence, neuroscience, behavior economics, just to name a few disciplines. Combine them and we use them to advise and kind of create and execute strategy and tactics and so forth. So as well as change managers developing and being the guardian of the change approach, technology are we going to use? I argue that we as change managers also have to help create the capacity and the capability of change at every level. And I want to give you some practical tips for that. Now, I've said those words 3 times, so I hope that they are starting to stick. Create capacity focus. So here is a great tool to help your clients and your teams prioritize and thus increase capacity. I'm a big fan of the in each increment of change planning work, what must be done, what should be done, what could be, won't be done. One in each planning increment that needs just as much attention and agreement as the first one. What must be done in this increment of work, but it usually gets attention. Plan breaking the work down into increments allows that flexibility to shift with new changes and those new requirements and those resource changes and the new outside forces that are we are chartering at the start of a project. We also need to charter at the start life. I personally have used this to plan a wedding. I've also used it with another family to help plan and help their kids with their homeschooling curriculum. So it's quite useful. So it says audio is breaking up, but that I'm back. How's that?
Yeah, I think
Are
we're
we good
having a
now?
little bit of a bandwidth issue. You were breaking up a little bit before. It seems like it's okay now.
Okay, good. All right, great. So now, guys, go ahead and jump on your
Thanks.
chat box, and I want you to put your answer, your best answer to this question. how much change do you think a person can absorb? Now, this has been an academic debate for at least the last 5 years, so there's no consensus that exists out there. But while you do that, I can tell you that in late 2020, Gardner put out a study on change fatigue, saying that it was those smaller ripples of change rather than the big bangs that can be the most damaging, like just moving bosses or teams. And Gardner offers two keys in this study to kind of reduce that damaging risk. And the first one is trust, meaning the extent that employees believe that the leaders and managers or the coworkers and HR have their interest in mind, and that they will do what they promise to do. Those teams that have that trust, they're shown to be 2.6 times have a 2.6 times greater capacity for change. And another key is team cohesion and connection, meaning the extent that which a team shares kind of a sense of belonging and a connection, along with a commitment to and accountability for the common goal. Right? So employees with that strong team cohesion, they have a capacity for change that is 1.8 times greater. So before I get to my answer on this question, I want to see a few of yours. So Katie, you said, oh, not infinite, I hope. Very nice. I think a lot of us kind of tend to agree. Martin's infinite, if there's agreement as to the why and why now. Okay, great. Carrie, depends on the individual. If a percentage, 25% of change, does it depends on the source of the change? Okay, I'm going to answer through that. And Jason, it depends on the person and their current environment, some more than others. So yeah, all of you guys are spot on. My answer to this question right now is resistance is personal. The root cause for one person may not be the same for another person. So my simple answer, just like a few of yours, would be until the individual has decided that they've had enough. So we will see how right we are as the academics continue to hash this particular question out. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit. As for saturation, right now the media has saturated folks, right, and all that has and is and keeps changing. I personally have to go on a full-blown media cleanse occasionally because it throws off focus and it adds to the despair for some people of why keep trying. And if you can put your change into a proper perspective of what is not changing when you're navigating your team through it, then you're going to see better results. To prove this, I want you to do an exercise today for yourself. Just take a minute and really look around and take stock for a few minutes. Do you still have a great deal that hasn't changed in your life over the past 14 months? Right? I mean, do you still have a car and clothes? Do you still have the same house, a job? Right? Do you still have hair that needs cutting, coffee to drink? So your personal environment may not be as unsafe or as molten as those may want you to believe. Those whose job it is to keep things dramatic and stirred up, right? So you stay tuned in or by. So it helps lessen the change disruption by making it clear to folks how much of their day-to-day is not changing, so that you don't tip them over into a zone in which they want to put a stop to your change, overtly or covertly, because they simply can't absorb more. And here's another angle on this. The fact is, and this is what I cut out quite a bit in this category on weariness, but we are chained to upsets in the past. I mean, we may have never understood or acknowledged why we felt so upset about change and changes with family and people and groups and jobs or situations, but they do accumulate. So the weariness piece that I cut out goes much deeper here, but I'm going to tell you the one solution punchline that will fit into the saturation piece. And that is positive experiences, positive emotions, positive interactions. Those build back in the missing safety and energy towards your efforts. And they're going to help you create willingness and give people courage to look and to try again. And that does take courage. To keep looking at the issues and try again requires courage. And it's positiveness that helps solidify that courage. Now, being unique about it is even better. So I want to give you a unique example to see if this helps you. I personally have been studying the blue ocean strategy, and the concept being that most of us swim in a red ocean, competing with the same market instead of really creating a new slice of market with unique value offerings. And they provided a case study here from UK fundraising, which outlined that the conventional UK charity fundraising efforts, they would provoke guilt and pity to raise money. I mean, think about those photographs of starving children we used to see on TV, right? They were mostly asking for large donations from high income donors throughout a whole year round campaign. But by applying blue ocean strategy techniques, then a group called Comic Relief was founded a few decades ago in UK. And unlike the traditional charities, Comic Relief recognized even the smallest donations. And this would even encourage children, who wanted to give their pocket money to help, or people with modest incomes who wanted to contribute. They could. Taking part in this particular charity cost as little as £1 for a plastic red nose, or $1.36 in US conversion rates, right? So Comic Relief aligned its value with its profits, but more importantly, it brought about that levity and positive emotions and fun back into charity by pushing people to operate above the emotional line where we find these appreciations and triumphs and successes, right? No matter how small. It's above that line, that emotional line that does exist where we can experience those triumphs and those successes. It's about positive energy. And without the positive energy, we all feel drained. It's as simple as that. I mean, we may have to talk through the negative experiences to try to get some relief, right? But the more positive that you can make any activity, then the more willingness folks will have to try again. And I realize this is a complete oversimplification, because what is positive for some and one person may not be positive for another. But there's usually a consensus, right, in your personal professional life of what might be considered fun and upbeat activity, right, that brings the teams closer and wanting to actually accomplish their goals. And yes, I see some of your chats here. Love the connection on this. Making space, great. Excellent. Okay, so this slide, as simple as this is I'm about ready to tell you something that's important. And it's probably the most important thing that I'm going to tell you today. It's deep. You'll need to think about this. And I have exactly one slide to summarize tomes of literature from multiple disciplines. So let's see how I do here. It is the speed and the force that are the enemies of change for people, especially when they're saturated and they're fed up, right? Let me break this down. Giving somebody something or depriving someone of something very slowly creates a different reaction than doing the same thing at very high speed and force. For example, you can get a wild Mustang to accept a rider if it's being done very slowly. Right? I'm from Texas. This is how we will do it. But done too fast, and the horse won't accept the change. I mean, just think about what's happened with technology kind of creeping into our lives with and our houses with smart devices. Some of us do remember the 80s and Orson Welles and Big Brother that we thought we'd all just rail against, right? And now we're willing and even paying to bring in as many smart devices that we feel we need. We have cars that can drive themselves. We're trusting car GPSs and now phones with GPSs over paper maps. All of this took time to get used to, even multi-decade planning. This was not an overnight switch, but they stuck and they continue to stick. COVID happened very fast for all of us. Right? Working from home virtually overnight as our permanent setup happened very fast. So it caused a lot of disruption. Now, what would happen if you got an announcement today and it said that you must return full-time to the office starting tomorrow? How would that feel? Right? What if instead I told you that in 3 months, we were going to migrate over to a hybrid model of working from home versus working in the office? and eventually make our way back to the office for most folks, but that I wanted your input into designing how this setup was going to happen, how this migration was going to happen. And I started with a survey, right? That I wanted to see you to see it and give me your input and suggest, right? Because in the end, we wanted to give managers guidelines, but we also wanted to empower them so that they feel that they could adjust according to their individual people's needs. I mean, do you feel the difference in speed and force there? Right? Think about the difference in reactions that you would get from people in general. Yes, I would freak out too, as some of these comments show. So to adjust force, we're going to have to talk about empathy. Empathy is conceptually putting yourself in somebody's shoes or role, right? Having empathy with another person, it doesn't mean that you stop asking them for valid and necessary business changes, but perhaps we recommend a few alternative ways to go about the changes. Force can be lessened by adding positiveness, levity, celebrations, encouragement, but force can be greatly reduced by ensuring that the stakeholders affected by the change have had some say in the change or its implementation. This might be one of the most important ways to reduce speed and force. Right? They'll get used to it. They have longer to get used to it because they're helping with the design of it. And the big difference in how we force, right, and how we adjust this force of change, or how the force of change is perceived by them, and whether or not it's felt like as if the change is being thrust down on them versus they had a seat in the decision-making table to design the change, that's how they perceive the force. It is still a fact that roughly 75% of change efforts fail per the latest results from multiple sources, right? But new studies from Duke University show that 80% can succeed as long as the individuals being changed have had some part in designing and decision making about the change. Dr. Edward Marshall proves this out in his latest research, and he's been showing some of that recent change research in webinars. So you can just Google him. He's really worth listening to. I think he's got another one coming up shortly on change management review. All right, we're down to the last couple of slides here. Thank goodness. I want to ask you, how would you increase empathy? Now, how do you increase empathy? You guys pop into this box on some suggestions here, but I can say that any manager gets a lot of info from secondhand sources. I mean, they have to. They can't be everywhere at once, especially virtually. It's really put distance, right? But when it comes to problematic situations and problematic people or processes, secondhand information isn't good enough, right? We have to stare the problem in the eye and get firsthand information. So don't rely on anyone else's account of the situation. We've got to get them to get in there and take a look at things yourself as change practitioners and also your leaders. And the fact is that we can never hope to understand somebody's behavior, let alone change it, without knowing the specific context in which the behavior occurred. All right, we have some examples. It says showing empathy, great. And then how about developing empathy, listening, truly hearing, seeking to understand? Absolutely. And being on their level where we're not designing in an ivory tower, right? We're actually going down and looking and seeing what's happening with them. All right, now this tip, Martin Brandt mentioned this tip last week in his presentation to you. So I'm going to speed through some tips really. I want you to give me a 2-minute bell when it's time here. I have plenty of tips here, but I'm going to just speed through them. The first one is, and these are taking some pages out of the Agile Playbook.
I just
2
want to
minutes
clarify.
to the end.
Okay, got it. You're on.
Yeah, tell me 2 minutes to the end. All right, and then that way I'll stop showing tips here.
Perfect.
All right, so here's cut down on the work in progress, or the WIP. What that means done, less started at one time. When you're saturated, you cut down on the work in progress because this allows focus, right? It helps prevent overwhelm. It'll track and measure the change impacts. when you disperse people across too many work streams, you actually get less done. And it reduces creative solutions. And we need creative solutions to look at things differently in order to innovate. It's hard to be positive when you can't complete thoughts or even conversations because you have back-to-back virtual meetings 8 or more hours a day. And work isn't happening outside of those virtual meetings. And there's no more time to schedule any more meetings. How much change is really new change are you going to be able to do, right? Another tip, it's never really been a better time to practice the Pareto principle. And the Pareto principle is 80-20 rule, right? Focus and do the 20% of the work that's going to give you 80% of the results that you want, and push aside the other work for now. Or if you're familiar with Stephen Covey's son, Sean Covey's work on the 4 disciplines of execution, or 4DX, the first step is to focus and to nail down those 1 to 3 goals that are called the wildly important goals, right? Every text that you're going to find on saturation has you first reevaluating priorities and asking yourself if you really need to make that change right now. And there's a reason for that fundamentally. All right, let's go to the next set of tips. I'm loving this chat box here interaction. Thank you. And I believe, Ashley, you save all of this. Like when you're doing the broadcast, people can see the tips. Great. So
Yep,
you guys can keep going. All right, now this is a fantastic idea to look into the whites of the problem's eyes, right, and apply this creative solutioning. This came from a ProSci senior change consultant, and he was talking about creative ways to increase empathy and to streamline the change management work. He conducted a resistance focus group with the goal to learn from them, making no feedback off limit. He briefly explained, spent 5 minutes to explain the change, and that's all. And then he simply asked, what are you resistant to? And he broke them down into small groups to discuss, and he asked them to hear the rational and irrational answers. And then he asked, what would you need to overcome your resistance? And finally, he asked, who do you need to help you overcome your resistance? And he ended the workshop, of course, thanking them for being part and investing into the change, knowing that they needed to feel some ownership over the change to really make it successful. Now, all of these results get fed into and were fed into the change strategy and the various tactics and plans for implementation. I mean, how many of you would prefer to hear firsthand what the resistance is going to be, and thus properly streamlining your strategy and tactics, saving everybody a bunch of time and noise, right? So these resistance focus groups I thought were such a great idea. I actually worked them into a contract here with another client with you in case that would help. All right, last couple of tools. When we are creating software, we don't have a clear image of everything we're going to need or even want, right? Which is why we utilize sprints and we demo pieces of it to get feedback from the business. And once we implement, though, the first handful of changes, feedback comes in. And if we're smart, then that feedback will then alter the next set of changes, right? We thought we had it fully defined at the beginning, but we never have it properly fully defined at the beginning. We use the feedback to look at it differently. That's how we get that diversity of thought into our products, right? So we advocate, and the suggestion is to advocate for iterating new change solutions through increments of work. I mean, thinking like this breaks down the change rollouts over time. So not all changes are impacting everyone at once. And also thinking like this helps your team quickly adjust to what worked, what didn't work, right? Any new change impacts, people leaving, people coming, environmental changes that you couldn't predict, political changes, etc. So working like this really helps increase that change capacity and reduce change disruption. And of course, is the entire theme of this conversation. So I did use words like iterative and incremental, and those do not mean the same thing. The slide image really clarifies the difference, so take a look here. Which one you use depends on how much you know at the start of an activity, but the fact is, planning can no longer be done as a single activity or an all-encompassing activity at the start of each initiative. I know utilities struggle here because of your rate cases and your budget systems. Those haven't changed, right? Those expectations and what they're asking of you has not changed. So there needs to be some kind of happy medium while we push some of those changes along. But let me ask you this, and honestly, take a look at this here. How many budgets or scopes did you nail in 2020? Pop that answer into one of the chat boxes here, right? There is some data to make a case for change this way. The scope of your changes, they are continually impacted also by achievements and other changes, both inside and outside of the organization. They aren't all in your control, but the quantity and the force and the speed of these impacts affect your change activities. So how could we think we could get a complete scope or plan or budget all at the start? So as a suggested process change, just start with breaking your work into smaller pieces and replanning, have a formal replanning after the achievement of each destination, pivoting from that new destination as you kind of define and state that destination. And it's those incremental planning sessions that will really dictate specifically the next set of change activities to move forward. I built this. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I see it. Very necessity, by the way. All right, for those of you that are avid readers, let's go into the end of this here. These are some additional books. Also in the slide deck, you're going to see some links to some of the research. But in general here, minute warning, is there any further questions anyone would like to ask or come off mic to anything else you want to hear about?
Actually, Cindy asked if you could go back to this. Yeah, the books. Yeah, that was.
Yeah, you bet. And by the way, with this being recorded, the slides are also available. These slides are available to you when you go into this particular conference, right, Ashley? You want to tell them how to get
Actually,
to
no,
the slides?
it's just the recording. So
it's the recording.
But,
okay.
Yeah, I would say if you can take a screenshot of this right now, that would be great. But we also do continue the conversation about all of these things on the LinkedIn group. So.
Excellent. And also, again, feel free, if you're not already connected with me on LinkedIn, please reach out. I'd like to learn from you as well and hear feedback, and that influences the next set of research and development and tools for clients. So thank you very much for listening. I hope I brought some value to you. I hope feel free to pop into the chat, and any particular thing that stood out for you that was valuable, I'd love to hear about it. I do have an additional webinar coming in May through Change Management Review to talk about similar subjects.
I was going to say thank you so much. We're jumping into a stretch break, but I will extend for if one person has a quick question they want to ask, just raise your hand, and then we can bring you in and ask to ask that question. Otherwise, I know you're getting some terrific feedback here. But yeah, I echo the feedback that you're getting in terms of this. You have such an energy and such a passion for this topic, Dana, and it's just always great to hear you break it down, and you break it down in a way that makes it seem so much easier.
Digestible. I'm really glad to hear that. If I broke it down any other way, I might add to your weariness and saturation, right?
I don't think so.
This fundamentally as a root, right? This really is a root. It's hard with this not addressed. How do we add any new change projects to it, right? And we all want change projects to happen. We need the business value, but we're going to have to confront and deal with this as a root with some of our clients and groups.
Definitely. Well, we have a question from Delina. Lean resources is an issue currently being faced by organizations. What are your thoughts of lean organizations dealing with change?
Okay, fantastic question. There are a handful, as you know, of 21st century change enabling systems, and lean very much is one of those change enabling systems. It is my fundamental belief that lean, with its concepts and values, agile with its concepts and values and principles, change management with its, these all overlap. right? These all can be integrated into a way of operating, a set of principles, right? Our behavior is shaped by our principles. What we say and do every day is shaped by our principles. If we have that as a fundamental set in our principles, where we're always thinking, get rid of the waste, what's taking too long, what's holding us up, right? We're thinking those thoughts with our activities, then we're fundamentally, that's what we're pushing, that's what we're executing. And that's how leaders shape culture, right? It's what they say and do on a day-to-day basis, and managers, supervisors, and ourselves. So we can influence that.
Very cool. Dana, I'm going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much. This has just been a super rich presentation as always, and a great to see you and to hear from you on this very important topic for right now. Thank you.
You bet.
All right, folks, let's get up out of your chair, move around a little bit, and then come on. Yeah, come on back at 3 o'clock Eastern time, and we're going to hear from Rosemary Perez at Southern California Edison. See you in a second, a few minutes.